The feed from the planet's surface filled my husk. The attaché class executive interface never felt like a tablet. It was a poured slab of computation, a briefcase of gravity I kept chained to the station's throat. Habitat Prime unspooled across it in ordered panes, environmental controls, power, transit, telemetry, comms, each striping itself into columns of numbers that behaved if I pressed them hard enough. 112 crew, 112 green icons, watts in, kilobytes out. My job title, Executive Director of Off-World Assets for the Interstellar Consortium, was the elegant lie we told investors. My function was to sit in a chair and force every column to balance in favor of the board. Dr. Alastair Finch's voice ran under the surface feed like a sales bed he'd mixed himself. "This is not simple mimicry," he said, baritone smooth as fresh lacquer. The camera held on Shaw, Xenobotany Jr., posture collapsed on command, head tilted to grief. Opposite her, the thing we had named a pantomime slouched into the same outline with perfect, skin-tight accuracy. Off-white body, seamless, a smooth ovoid where a face should be, two black discs sunk in shallow cups that swallowed light and returned only the suggestion of eyes. Finch breathed for the room. This is shared experience, resonance. I watched two screens at once. On the main, Shaw's lips compressing into a thin tremor, the pantomime's blank visage tearing itself along an invisible seam to copy a downturned mouth, the black discs dilating to imitate sorrow. On the secondary, the station's bio-listing dashboard, the workforce compressed to colored dots, flushing green as cortisol dipped across habitats and corridors. Finch's words had chemical utility. He could lower the price of fear. The board would call it progress. Finch had promised a contact strategy built on his empathic resonance model, a theory that treated empathy as a law of consciousness, as fixed as mass, and he was delivering footage that would clip well in a quarterly deck. I logged the result as one more mirrored expense. A mirror, by design, does not add. It reflects. 3 weeks of contact had taught the constructs the entire choreography of us. Gesture for gesture, tone for tone, surprise, anger, boredom, sorrow, all returned pristine and empty, a theater that consumed our inputs and printed them back. Petabytes of footage, terabytes of redundant biometrics, no new language, no new tool, no concept that did not first exist on our side of the glass. The cost of storage alone had outpaced the value of the tape. I tightened my jaw and registered the motion like an amber warning light. Muscular reflex, unproductive output, habit. There had been a time, 20 years and 42 dead miners ago, when I believed conviction mattered. Back on Hyperion, a charismatic project lead had trusted his gut over the seismics and pushed for a record day. I had filed a formal report predicting a collapse. It had been dismissed as pessimism by men who liked miracles delivered on schedule. On my screen that night in logistics, I had watched black dots wink to gray, then to nothing, 42 times. Idealism, I learned, was a weapon of mass destruction. Numbers were the only armor. You do not fix men, you debug systems. The door behind me sighed a careful release, and Kalen Vance stepped in, head of security, risk mitigation in a bunker's body. "Director." Concrete dragged over gravel, the shape of a salute without the waste of a hand. "Report." No incidents. Surface habitat secure, perimeter clean. Hands clasped behind his back, textbook deference rendered in steel. "I have reservations about Dr. Finch's protocols. The team's unstructured contact introduces variables." "Your reservations are logged," I said without looking up. The board is pleased with Dr. Finch. The board isn't here, Vance said, nothing in his tone but physics. Sentiment is a poor substitute for security. I nodded because the logic was good, because Vance was a reliable part, because everything he did fit. Then he did something that did not. As he spoke his last sentence, he flicked the first 3 fingers of his right hand, an insignificant punctuation, not his. I had seen the exact gesture 100 times. Finch's flourish, grafted onto a man who despised him. My own hand stopped over the husk. I raised my eyes. Vance stood there, unaware he'd just run someone else's subroutine. A small error in human firmware. Noise, I told myself. Proximity effect. Noted and filed. Anything else, Kalen? No, Director. He turned and left. The door sealed. I logged the inconsistency at 1800 station time, crossed it with his stress indicators, and pushed it down the stack where minor anomalies wait to become patterns or dissolve into statistics. The station began to wind toward rest. I initiated the end-of-cycle sync, the nightly aggregation of all crew biometrics, watched the progress bar fill, and got a single amber icon in return. Data integrity anomaly. 2 files flagged, Dr. A. Bell, mission ethicist, module beta, Tobin Shaw, hydroponics, on the surface, 100 kilometers away. The era lived in their previous sleep cycle, deep sleep, light sleep, REM. The jagged, personal rhythm of the body had a line between them to 3 decimal places. Not similar, identical, statistically impossible. Ghost in the aggregator, I thought, and reached past my dashboards into the raw feeds. The waveforms matched. The corruption, if there was any, sat upstream of the roll-up. I ordered CENTCOM to scrub the biometric channels. Integrity protocol, traced to origin. The station voice answered with the same unyielding bass I had chosen for it when we commissioned the core. Diagnostic complete. Systems optimal. No corruption detected. I ran it again. The same. CENTCOM does not comfort. It executes. The machine was clean. The error was outside the machine. The proximity klaxon cracked the room open again. Sharp, insistent, not yet read, Sector 7G, Xylo surface. I pushed the main feed into Tobin Shaw's helmet camera. The image lurched, then stabilized on command. A cargo sled, standard pallet, low repulsors, spat sparks in the middle distance, one thruster stuttering a wild cone. 50 meters away, Shaw on her knees, hands clamped to her helmet, as if grief could be blocked by pressure. Between them, a pantomime, mid-fall, left arm lying a clean meter from the shoulder. The severed arm twitched, then tapped, slow even. I heard the breath rasp in Shaw's mic and cross-checked the previous minutes. 5 minutes earlier, waiting on a soil assay, Shaw had tapped her leg with the same rhythm to bleed off impatience. The arm was a peripheral stuck in a borrowed loop. The standing body changed itself deliberately, the mouth seam erased, the black discs clouded to off-white. Every learned feature dissolved like chalk underwater until nothing remained but a blank ovoid. Then it softened, not a fall, a slump. The sound was not meat tearing or bone cracking. It was the dry whisper of sand in a ceramic throat. When stillness came back, there was no statue. There was a mound. Director? Finch's voice found a small, strained register I'd never heard. It's arm. It isn't bleeding. I opened an incident report because the ledger wanted an entry. Asset degradation event, 1942 station standard. Unit, pantomime 2. Cause, impact with malfunctioning cargo sled. Result, total loss, And then I wrote the line that finally put a spine in the idea that had been itching my hands for days. The biomimetic sync is not in us. Bell and Shaw were receivers. The pantomimes were transmitters. We had been logging the wrong organism. Croft, I said into the private channel. Director, dry voice, precise edges. Scientist who loved nouns. Assessment of the residue. From visuals only, desiccated silicate fiber, chalky. No enzymatic activity, no necrosis, clean. To say more, I need a sample, preferably from a functioning unit. Then take one. Protocol. Finch broke in at once, voice flooded with the moral heat he kept banked like a furnace. Section 4 forbids invasive procedures. We cannot desecrate remains. There is no data to support remains, I said. There is data indicating state change from functional to inert. Dr. Croft requires a sample. To harm a sentient being would be, Doctor, I said, and documented the interruption with my free hand. You are arguing premises. I am following evidence. I opened the mission charter, navigated to my authorization blocks, and signed a new directive. Primary objective reclassified. Diplomatic engagement to technological assessment. First contact protocol suspended. Surface authority transferred to Vance. Threat analysis and intelligence gathering enacted under 7B. I did not raise my voice. I changed the labels. Silas Croft took the somatic probe, a rod of clean silver with a blue passive emitter and a needle that lived hidden until called, and walked toward a standing pantomime that held a copied posture of defensiveness it would never need. Passive scan first, a soft flare of color, no reaction. Invasive next, a hair-thin puncture into off-white smoothness, no flinch, no sound, 3 seconds of contact, a green blink. My husk chimed and spilled data. No gene ladder, no amino profile, materials list, complex polymer chains, silicon carbon base, trace tungsten, trace platinum, no cellular structure, no biological markers, no life. The proof behaved the way proof should. It closed the door behind us quietly, permanently. I felt the room of possibility shrink to a shape I could manage. I began composing the board report while the samples cached themselves to redundant drives. To the ISC board, from Orson Hayes. Subject, urgent mission reclassification, Project Pantomime. Previous assessments nullified. Non-biological, unmanned surveillance platforms confirmed. Presence of controlling hostile intelligence and system. Mission status. Red. I attached Croft's analysis and the video of Pantomime 2's reset. I wrote the operational recommendations. Recall all surface teams, quarantine materials, diagnostic sweep of comms for unauthorized signals, defensive posture in effect, and cued the send. 18 minutes out, 18 minutes back. In the meantime, I was the only court of appeal. Dr. Bell appeared in my doorway as the timer rolled over, cheeks chalked out, knuckles wide around a data slate. Director, the implications are that we have been under observation, I said without pausing the draft. We act accordingly. But their ontological status, are they extensions, slaves, ethical frameworks? Shift, I said, from contamination to infiltration. He pinched the bridge of his nose, eyes closed in a gesture I had only ever seen Vance make when he thought no one was watching. The contagion did not respect role, rank, or argument. It was stripping signature out of the crew like varnish. I logged it and censored the word infection in my draft because words leak policy. I sent the packet. The timer appeared. 001800, then 59, then 58. 36 minutes of unilateral control if Earth answered. a theater of one. "Briefing room," I told Bell. "All department heads, 15 minutes." He swallowed. "All of them?" "All," I said. "Tell them the project has experienced scope creep. We are recalculating the cost." The room was a box of composite and acoustics built to make decisions sound like they belonged to whoever spoke last. I docked the husk. Behind me, I threw Croft's materials list onto the wall, blowing it up into the only kind of simplicity that cuts through heat. The faces around the table were tight, darting, people who had arrived expecting to be blamed for physics. "As of 2100, I said, Project Pantomime is terminated. Mission reclassified to threat assessment and containment. The constructs are sophisticated non-biological devices, drones in essence. We do not know their range or the nature of the intelligence operating them from orbit. We will proceed on the assumption that this intelligence is hostile." A murmur rippled. I let it die. "You can't know that," Finch said, voice fragile and climbing. "They've done nothing to harm us. They have misrepresented their nature to gain access to personnel and process," I said. "That is harm in our domain. That is espionage." "Or a preface," he said, gathering a little of his old fervor. "A mirror, so we can see ourselves first. Shared ground. We cannot cut the bridge while we're still on it." He laced his fingers so tightly on the tabletop that the knuckles blanched. Across from him, Tobin Shaw, staring past us all into some middle distance, folded her hands into the same knot without looking. The copy was precise down to the angle of thumbs. The behavioral virus kept its own ruthless books. "The time for hypotheses is over," I said. "This is a security operation now." Director Kalen Vance from the door, and every head turned because Vance never entered a discussion uninvited. "We don't know their motive," he said. "Treating them as hostile could provoke—" The syntax of his argument was Finch's. The posture, shoulders slightly slumped into academia's uncertainty, belonged to Bell. Vance wore both without noticing. The room had become a hall of mirrors, each person reflecting someone else's stress back a half-second later. Before I could cut him off, the husk overrode everything with a hard red banner. Priority 1. Unidentified mass detected. High orbit. No transponder. "Source?" I said, hands already moving CENTCOM's long-range optics. "No known," Vance answered, the security man snapping back into himself with the clarity of a pain reflex. "It wasn't on the last sweep." We burned the image out of the black with every sensor we had. The object resolved slowly into wrongness. A dark, asymmetrical hulk the size of a city block, patchworked in non-reflective panels, crystalline scabs, fibrous scars. No windows, no lights, no invitation to understand it as anything but dead matter in motion. The puppet master, I thought, and felt nothing useful. A fleck detached, smaller than a sled. Its vector drew clean and unambiguous across my plot. A line straight to the Ansible relay. Our buoy in the dark. A silver crossbeam of human cleverness that hung 1,000 kilometers off our port like an answered prayer. "Intercept solutions," I said. "Any asset." "Calculating," CENTCOM said without apology. "Negative. Object velocity exceeds station-based intercept. Relay is outside point defense envelope." We watched the speck grow. The room went quiet in the way that points of impact do, the collective body preparing for an answer larger than it. Dr. Finch shook his head, a man trying to reboot. Shaw made a small involuntary sound. 2 seats down, Croft lifted a hand to his mouth without looking at Shaw and covered it in the same shape. The relay gleamed like foil in the last frame. The fleck touched. The structure shivered and came apart into glitter that spun briefly and then was nothing. The feed cut to a single line of text in the consortium's default font. Signal lost. No one moved. Their faces were open parentheses waiting for me to close them with a new sentence. I looked at the timer, 14 minutes, and understood that no reply was coming. Not now, maybe never. Meeting adjourned, I said. Return to posts. My voice did not change. My job did not. Numbers had stopped describing the world. They still had to pay for it. Signal lost. The words sat on the wall in the consortium's default font, serene as a receipt. No flare, no echo, just an absence that recalculated everything. Dr. Bell, I said, already stripping the room back to function. Medbay, prepare sedation protocols. Rank is irrelevant. Anyone who cannot maintain operational composure will be sedated and confined to quarters. This is a security matter. He swallowed, nodded, and moved. Kalen, I said, initiate full station lockdown. No movement between modules without my authorization. Recall the last surface shuttle. Seal the box. Yes, Director. They looked at me. Finch hollowed of color. Croft set and tired. Shaw in that distant place panic makes, and waited for the next sentence to tell them what shape to wear. The rest of you return to posts. Full diagnostics. I want a clean inventory of power reserves, water, nutrition, and ammunition. We are no longer a science mission. We are a garrison. Act accordingly. Habitat Prime fell silent in stages. First, the percussion of maglocks rolling shut through the corridors, a sequence of metal consonants that mapped the station into smaller, safer truths. Then the hum that meant redundancy drained away as non-essentials went dark and the power budget marched to life support and defensive arrays. Last went the human sound, thinned to the whisper of filtered air and the faint, steady animal noise of 112 bodies pretending, with graphs, to be calm. The numbers that came back were a sober ledger. Nutritional paste and hydroponic supplement 300 days before the spreadsheet began to scream. Water recyclers at 98%, close to closed, not closed enough. Ration trigger at 82 days. Oxygen loop stable. Ammunition finite in a way that matters. 144 M7 driver rounds. Tools meant for holes, not invasions. Effective against chalk-bodied puppets. Useless against the reef in high orbit. The bio-listing board turned jaundiced. Yellow everywhere, cortisol up, sleep fractured, respiration spiking like a bad chorus. My icon stayed a placid green because my biology was not the asset that needed management. The request for a meeting came tagged priority from Finch. Denying it would plant the word tyrant where I needed compliance. Granting it exposed me to his contagion of hope. Understood risk is manageable. Vance, I sent, admit Finch alone? He entered flayed a presentation, coat rumpled, eyes glassed by grief. The charismatic varnish stripped back to the grain. He didn't sit. I've analyzed the trajectory, he said without preamble. The mimicry, the timing of the Ansible's destruction. I was wrong. Not about empathy, about context. This is a crucible. They've severed hope to force authenticity. If I can go down alone, without noise, without your noise, I can show them we still choose connection. The last shuttle is fueled. He rubbed his right thumb in a small circle against the side of his index finger. Reflex. thoughtless. I keyed the motion into the husk. Visual archive, cross-reference. The match chirped back a breath later. Marcus Elgin, communications lead for the relay. Now a cloud of glittering ice. Finch had spoken to him 3 times. The dead were bleeding habits into the living. "No," I said. "Your request is denied." "You don't understand," he said softly, desperately. "They left one construct near the landing zone. It's waiting." "I understand. You are becoming a vector." He blinked. "A what?" "A delivery system. Not of empathy, of compromise. You're not just vulnerable to this contagion, Doctor. You carry it. And I cannot quantify that risk inside my walls." His face moved through disbelief to something I recognized from old audits. Pity for a man who can't read the column where salvation goes. It was almost enough to make me argue. Instead, I labeled, "You will be escorted to medbay," I said. "Sedation and quarantine until further notice." The door opened on cue. Vance and an officer entered like a period at the end of a sentence. Finch tried once more, the last reflex of his profession. "Orson, this isn't a security problem. It's a crisis of faith." Vance laid a hand on his shoulder. Finch didn't fight. He let himself be turned, and as he crossed the threshold, he looked back at me with that same pity, deep enough to reach through a hull. Bell arrived before my report could absorb the action. He had traded pallor for purpose. "I formally object to Dr. Finch's quarantine," he said, slate tight to his ribs. "It violates the consortium's charter on crew welfare. He has committed no crime. He is not ill." "He is a variable I cannot control," I said. "I am reassigning a compromised asset out of the theater." "The risk of what?" "Believing too much." His voice steadied as he spoke, drawing strength from the act of naming my failure. "I was chief ethicist on the Tanager project. You read the file. The failure was not the protocol. It was treating a human as a predictable machine and sacrificing an individual for the integrity of an experiment. That is what you are doing now." "Tanager was contained," I said. "This is not." I dragged the evidence to the wall with a palm. Split screen, Vance flicking Finch's gesture without awareness. Croft and Shaw lifting hands to mouths in perfect sync. The sleep cycle overlay of Bell and Shaw. Waveforms married to the 3rd decimal despite distance and vacuum. "This is not belief, Doctor. It is a transmissible phenomenon eroding command integrity. Hope is not neutral here. It is an input an enemy can amplify." He looked until the shape of the pattern overcame the shape of his argument. His shoulders dropped. When he lifted his eyes again, the tremor was gone. "Then I will document everything," he said, voice quiet as a recorder. "If any of us survive, the record will show where we crossed the line. I can't stop you. I will not be complicit." He left with his back straight and his mandate revised. I was now being prosecuted in the future tense. I worked. I tightened the box. I shaved power from corridors no one would walk, layered redundancies across air, heat, water. I recalculated lifespan down to hours and then into the good lies we call plans. The crew, locked to their modules, became noise and color. On different cameras in different sectors, 2 engineers paced tight rooms in mirrored arcs like pendulums that had found the same small gravity. I logged it. The list of corruptions grew. Hostile Alpha hung above us like a dead god, saying nothing, doing nothing. Silence is an efficient weapon. 3rd cycle into lockdown, an external perimeter cam near the landing zone pinged. One of the few eyes I'd left open to the world. I routed the feed to my husk. A single pantomime stood in the frame, bathed in the rusted wash of the gas giant's light. It had been there, unmoving, for 72 hours. A sentinel at a deserted gate. It moved. It raised a hand and held it. A wave offered to no one. Then the hand closed and a single digit lifted. The gesture was obscene and universal. I felt a small, precise anger I could not invoice. It pointed down. The audio pickup caught a low subsurface hum. The soil around its feet swelled and cracked as white spires grew through the rust, tapering to needles. One spike, then another, then dozens, then a forest. I ran a pattern match on reflex. The solution arrived without flourishes. They had built a star chart, our neighborhood, scaled and crisp. At the center, the tallest spire, our sun, softened and sank into its own base until only an absence marked its place. Not a threat, a markup. For a long time, I did not move. The tight heat that had lived under my sternum since Hyperion found my chest again and pressed hard enough to set a fine tremor in my hand. I made a fist to stop it. It kept going. A memory surfaced like a file misfiled under crisis. Chloe at 7, on the manicured lake shore at a consortium retreat, hands dirty with a complex twig castle. A swan with stupid, perfect confidence walked up and dismantled it piece by piece, not out of malice, but to clear its path. Chloe did not cry. She set her mouth and watched her meaning come undone. I archived the memory. It did not belong to a solution. A notification blinked in the corner of my screen. Personnel archive error. Corrupted file restored. Sender, Hayes, Chloe. Timestamp before the relay. I opened it. Dad, it's me. People here are saying something went wrong, that you've gone dark. Are you okay? Just send something so I know. Static filled what she didn't say. The file closed. I looked at the hole in their celestial map where she lived and felt the tremor again, correctly labeled this time. Not a metric. Fear. I recognized the shape and let it in for exactly one breath. Then I put it where fear belongs, background process, and wrote the only plan left that balanced. The Inheritors were biological technologists. Their ship was a biosystem. Xylo's atmosphere was thick with rust-colored spores from resonant flora, harmless to us, corrosive to fine electronics. What would they do to living machinery on the scale of a city? If we could seed high orbit with aerosolized spore and regolith, we might infect the reef the way it had infected us. Habitat Prime was not a weapon designed to fire at anything. It could become a delivery system. A controlled detonation of the fusion core in the upper atmosphere would lift a cloud to orbital heights. The energy would not kill them. The bloom might. Constraints stacked up like locks. The station was not rated for entry. Its bones were trusses and corridors, not heat shield. A deorbit burn required two-part authorization, my command sequence, and a physical override at the engineering core. A safety against a director like the one I was about to be. The chief engineer lay sedated. I needed steadiness that wasn't already borrowed. Dr. Croft, I said into a secure channel. His face appeared, haggard but orderly. Director, I have a plan to neutralize hostile Alpha, I said. We will pilot the station into Xylo's upper atmosphere and detonate the core to seed a spore bloom. Your own notes on the spore's effect on complex circuitry underwrite the hypothesis. I need you in engineering to bypass the physical lock. He didn't flinch. He didn't sermonize. He processed. The spore's resonant frequency could cascade through biosystems like a feedback loop, he said after 10 seconds, and an exhale. Planetary scale EMP, but for their biology. It's viable. The lock requires a chief engineer sequence. The chief engineer is sedated, I said. Operational effectiveness compromised by contagion. I am authorizing dismantlement of the security housing on the primary control conduit. Beyond my authorization. I'm expanding your authorization. Silence again. The kind where a man measures his remaining hours. Why me? Because you follow data, not faith. Because you see what they are. And because you understand how to introduce a catastrophic error into a hostile system. He looked off screen, then back. The last thin ribbon of doubt left his eyes. I'll need an M7 and a plasma torch. The housing is hardened. Authorized, I said, and left the command chair for the first time in hours. Engineering was a cathedral of conduits and heat sinks. The manual override console crouched behind triple-thickness plate like a priesthood. Croft knelt with the torch cooling beside him, the M7 driver in his hands. Each trigger pull hammered a bolt with a magnetic punch that made the housing ring. The locks are magged from the inside, he said without turning. If I melt them, I risk slagging the conduit. We become a dead stick. Probability? 70 to 80. Unacceptable. I scanned the room and found the row of red Aegis foam canisters on the far bulkhead, emergency sealant that hardened into an impenetrable resin mid-spray and was kept under the kind of pressure you don't mistake for safety. I held out my hand. Driver. He passed it over without question. Get behind the reactor shield, I said. He obeyed. I sighted the primary valve on the nearest canister and pulled the actuator. The driver cracked. The tungsten rod punched the valve clean. The canister responded like a compressed hurricane. The air buckled. The bay slammed into me. Shards of red casing and mounts sang through the room. I tasted chemistry and copper. When the ringing subsided, the armored face of the console hung on one sparking hinge. Behind it, the manual panel blinked erratically but whole. It worked, Croft said, stepping out of cover, dusted amber with unreacted resin. Insane, but it worked. A calculation, I said, retrieving my husk and finding its screen still alive beneath a new constellation of scratches. Get us control. He jacked a diagnostic lead into the exposed board. Main conduit is overloaded, bypassing security handshake. 1 minute. 30 seconds, I said, bringing the trajectory plotter online. A thin white line arced from our orbit to a point in high air. That line held a murder and a possibility in equal measure. Croft's hands moved. Bypass engaged, he said. His palm hovered over a small physical switch revealed by our violence. Board is green, ready on your code. On my mark, I said. 3, 2, 1. Mark. I keyed my sequence. He flipped the switch. The station groaned like a thing waking up wrong. Thrusters bit. The floor leaned. Through the hull, I felt the low, bone-jarring note of mass changing its mind. On the board, all the human lights went red together, a choir of bodies registering the tilt into death. I didn't need that data anymore. I killed the page and pulled up the external feed. Hostile alpha stirred, dark flecks peeled from its surface, probes like the one that had taken the relay, and spread in a pattern the way oil spreads on water. They didn't aim at us. They drew themselves into a net along our projected path, a soft wall intended to alter a decimal, to turn a suicide into a miss. We don't have power for evasive, Croft said over the vibration. We don't need evasive, I said. We need noise. Bay 3's shuttle was fueled, caged, coded for caution. I overrode the safeties. wrote a single stupid instruction into its nav brain: full burn, corkscrew, center of the net. I opened the bay. "Launch," I said. Croft slapped the command. On the external cam, the shuttle dashed out like something flung by a giant's thumbnail. It spun, flared, became the kind of threat logic hates. The probes reacted as they had to. A wedge broke formation, a hole opened narrow. Not enough for comfort, enough for statistics. The plotter recalculated. Intercept probability slid from certainty to a coin toss. We hit air. The first contact wasn't heat. It was sound, then weight. The station shuddered and cried as atmosphere found edges meant for vacuum and tried to make meaning out of them. Warnings flowered across every screen. Hull integrity at 40% and falling. A bulkhead surrendered somewhere with a long, tearing vowel. The decks tilted harder. The smell changed to hot polymer and metal the color of pain. I looked for the only file that still contained anything I wanted. Chloe's message sat in the corner of the screen like a nameplate. I didn't open it. I kept where I could see it as the number we had no right to save and were saving anyway. "It's elegant," Croft said suddenly, calm at the end. "As a biological weapon, elegant." I watched the altitude spin down and did not answer. The probes were behind us. Only atmosphere remained between us and the calculation I'd chosen. The husk threw the final line we would ever read in a steady font that had never failed me. Core containment. Failure imminent. Detonation in 10, 9, 8. I did not feel brave. I felt the satisfaction of a sheet that finally balanced. The asset had been protected at the cost of the machine that could never have been built to do this and was doing it anyway. At 3, I closed my eyes, not to pray, but to keep a promise I had not managed to send. 5 years later, Chloe Hayes sat in a cafe with a view of the consortium's headquarters, a building that used to pretend it was made of light. The new base was a blunt, windowless block, its skin a matte, composite black that drank the morning. Above it, the tower still rose, but bristled now with sensor arrays that weren't in any brochure and didn't blink. The city around it had learned the posture of a flinch. New concrete planters doubling as barriers, new bollards with armored roots, traffic patterns that kinked around checkpoints the maps refused to show. The sky wore bracelets, thin lines that tracked and tracked and tracked. The plaque in the lobby, she had gone once, out of obligation and a kind of anthropology, held 112 names. Her father's at the top. A perfect font, cut into a surface meant to last longer than grief. A docent explained to a class of children that Director Orson Hayes had prevented a catastrophic reactor breach from destabilizing the system, a phrase that left no fingerprints. The alien contact was officially inconclusive. The docent's voice had the soft authority of people trained to be obeyed in emergencies. The consortium had sent Chloe a commendation, a stipend described as a survivor's pension, and a sealed slate containing the mission file, a block of text she was legally forbidden to open. It sat in a safe behind her winter coats, the size of a book and the weight of the version of the world that had needed her father more than she had. The world he bought lived on the surface of everything now. Orbital defense platforms stitched a quiet grid around the planet. Children learned constellations for identification rather than wonder, pointing out lines of approach and coverage gaps with the earnestness that used to belong to storytelling. University syllabi acquired course codes for systems hardening and planetary resilience. Hope had been budgeted into public trust and amortized across election cycles. There were new startups whose product was vigilance. There were new prayers that sounded like checklists. Chloe watched office workers stream through the headquarters, mouth in waves, badges touching metal, faces angled for cameras. She wondered how often her father had stood at a window in that building and told a number to move like a person. She wondered whether he'd ever stood there and missed the day outside. She finished her coffee, which tasted like the promise of productivity, and walked out into air that smelled faintly of ozone and construction dust. The city's morning had the thinned-out brightness of screens. She let the crowd rinse around her and turned, for no reason she could name, toward the park. In the park, a swan shouldered up from the lake, white neck a question mark that refused to ask. A girl knelt near the shore, elbows dirty, building a palisade from twigs and reeds the way children build every defense. Seriously, as if it were the first time anyone had thought of it. The swan advanced with the dumb, proprietary confidence of things that have never once failed to claim. Chloe stopped at the edge of the path. She had a memory for this, not just the scene, the temperature of it. She remembered being 7 at a corporate retreat, her father called away by a vibrating husk. She remembered the swan dismantling her castle, not with malice, but with a steady practicality that ignored the small meanings of small people, and her own mouth pressed flat as a line on a screen. This time, she stepped off the path. "Hold on," she said to the girl, kneeling on the other side of the little fort. The swan hissed, broad feet working the mud, head low. Chloe slid her hands under the damp lattice, lifted with care, and carried it 3 meters upshore to a place the bird's path did not require. She passed the girl a longer branch, a better brace. The swan paused, recalculated, and turned toward another untroubled piece of ground. The girl stared at Chloe as if adults were not supposed to do anything that didn't have a form to sign. "Thanks," the girl said, not sure yet whether gratitude had a cost. "You're welcome," Chloe said, and felt the ridiculous lift of theater. A small rescue, contraband kindness, in a culture that audited mercy as inefficiency. She waited for the sting of guilt. It did not arrive. The world did not end. The swan kept its schedule. In her apartment that evening, she set her keys in the shallow dish by the door and sat at the small table by the window. The defense grid silhouettes cut angles out of the stars. The radio on the shelf, the one she'd bought from a ham operator who liked to talk about ionospheric skip like it was weather, whispered recipes and antenna links and voices that belonged to retirees and teenagers and the kind of people who liked arguments they could solve with parts lists. She turned the volume down until the words became a living room's pulse. She opened the drawer where she kept ordinary papers, warranties, expired cards, old class syllabi. The second slate lay there, not the sealed mission file, but the device the consortium had returned with a copy of her father's last message. She had never pressed the play icon. The weight of it had become a kind of furniture. The message had traveled millions of kilometers compressed to a format that didn't care about the blood in it. It had a date stamp 3 days before signal lost. Her father's ledger had always said a silence cost less. Chloe lifted the slate. It woke to a neutral, dutiful glow. The file name sat in the center, her surname and his, a colon between them like a road unbuilt. She thought of the plaque, the bristling building, the way her father had used the word asset, as if it could love him back. She tapped open. There was no video. Compression made his voice thinner and grainier, as if distance were a kind of dust. "Tell her he said, and the file cut, not like a knife, but like a redaction. No click, no apology. The shard of sentence hung in the room, perfect as a fragment of glass. Chloe pressed the icon again. The same 3 words. Again, the same. She searched the directory. There was no longer version, no hidden appendix. The slate did not care about the slang of closure. It did not care that fine would have been a lie and sorry a broken wire. It had saved him from adding a word that would turn into an accusation later. She laughed, a small astonished sound that didn't feel like cruelty. It was exactly the kind of tenderness he would choose, if you could call it tenderness. A sentence left unfinished, so the ledger didn't lie. She set the slate down and slid it back among the papers where ordinary things were kept alive by use. Through the window, a platform blinked the reassuring rhythm of no alert, and for a moment she hated the comfort of that pattern with a concentration that surprised her. The silence from the stars that followed Habitat Prime had been absolute. It was proof of victory, the government said. It was proof of caution, the skeptic said. It was proof of nothing, the frightened said, because proof is a word the future uses to describe whatever the present can't afford to doubt. She turned to the ham set. Her handle was a joke, paper for it, and the net was full of normal failures. Bread that didn't rise, antennas that wouldn't tune, people who had stayed on a frequency for company and found it. She followed the ritual, call sign, location, weather. She could say, clear skies, without meaning it. To whomever appraises, she typed in the small text window of a low-traffic channel. We are not only what we defend, we are also what we hand back when the wind rises. She sent it. The set made the satisfying little noise that meant the sentence had joined the soup of small transmission. It would travel 3 blocks, maybe 3 cities. It would bounce off the belly of the sky and land in someone's kitchen, where it would be read and shrugged at, and perhaps remembered for 10 minutes. It accomplished nothing measurable. She did not care. The measurable things had owned enough. Her door buzzed. She jumped, heart lurching, as if alarms were still coded for muscle, not thought. No one visited without messaging first. She went to the intercom. A delivery, no signature required. She rode the elevator down, felt the 3 discreet cameras taste her face. The lobby smelled of metal and plants, 2 kinds of manufacturing. A small box waited on the shelf. No return address beyond a blind courier hub. Back upstairs, she opened it with the letter opener she never used for letters. Inside lay an object wrapped in the gray foam the consortium used to cradle instruments and egos. She peeled it back and found a component she didn't recognize, a short cylinder of off-white composite, smooth as bone. It fit in her palm like a tool that had forgotten what it did. Her breath did the small automatic stutter the body uses for border crossings. She thought, instantly and unhelpfully, of chalk slumping into a mound. There was a card beneath it, plain and cream, with a printed line in the consortium font. Residual sample. She turned the cylinder and found an inset seam so fine it was almost imaginary. The ham radio hissed in the other room, a sound like a lake worrying ashore. Chloe set the cylinder back in the foam and reached for her phone to call the number that would make this someone else's problem. She did not dial. Instead, she went to the window and looked out at the sky. The platforms blinked on their schedules. The city's arteries moved their quiet, armored blood. Somewhere, in rooms above rooms, people like her father recalculated the cost of everything? Somewhere else, not on any of their maps, space kept its counsel. She pressed her thumb to the seam. It warmed. A section lifted, not like a lid, but like an eyelid, and inside lay a disc no bigger than a coin, black and matte, and set in a cradle of resin honeycomb. Not an eye. Biological lens, she thought, and felt foolish for thinking in the old vocabulary of the project. This was not a trophy. It was a suggestion. She could put it in an envelope and mail it to a journalist who would not know what he was looking at. She could carry it to the consortium and watch it vanish into the same calm that had renamed her father's work heroism. She could keep it. She could grind it to powder and let the dust decide whether it was dangerous by dying or not dying in her plants. The radio hissed, then clicked, then this was nothing. Of course it was nothing. Toned in a pattern she recognized because she had spent 2 years listening to the world learn how to be afraid. Station code, long, short. The old call sign of Habitat Prime rendered as if by a drunk or a ghost. It could have been atmospheric noise. It could have been 2 teenagers keying a mic for a joke. It could have been what you hear when you wait too long to hear something. Chloe went back to the table and wired her small transmitter into the set the way the man at the flea market had taught her, with a reverence that looked like patience. She laid the cylinder down beside the slate that had saved her father from finishing a sentence. Between them, she put a pencil and a sheet of paper, because sometimes a line must be drawn by hand, with mistakes. She did not tell herself that she was about to change anything large. She had inherited too much rigor to lie at that scale. What she had were residues, a fragment of a machine that had learned to copy love without feeling it, a half sentence that was truer than any goodbye, the muscle memory of lifting a small, fragile thing out of harm's way. She keyed the mic. "Paper for it," she said, because even jokes deserve to be accounted for. "Testing?" Silence. Then the soft chorus of people who had nothing to sell, only time. A woman in another part of the city described a storm. A boy asked whether anyone had the schematic for a preamp that didn't squeal. An old man read a poem about bread. No appraisers, no angels, just the hum of a network made of patience. She set the cylinder on the sill where the night could hold it in view. She added a note to the bottom of her father's unfinished line, on paper, not in a system, because some addenda live better off ledger. It did not close anything. It made a place for breath. Outside, a child in the courtyard threw a paper glider and missed the air. He bent, adjusted a crease with enormous seriousness, and threw again. The platform lights blinked their steady comfort. The city exhaled its practiced calm. Above the grid and the satellites and the debris of old plans, the dark held. It was not an answer. It was the space into which answers either came or didn't. Chloe turned off the kitchen light so the window became a truer mirror. Her face looked back at her superimposed over the sky her father had protected with a math that valued survival above everything else. She touched the glass with 2 fingers, not as a salute, but as a way to feel the difference in temperature between inside and out. It was small and real. She smiled, not because anything had resolved, but because resolve had finally chosen a direction toward the unmeasurable, the trivial, the acts that don't amortize. She left the radio on low and the note on the table and the cylinder on the sill and went to bed with the window cracked for air. Somewhere above the city, a platform blinked through its checklist. Somewhere farther up, Something that had once mirrored humans perfectly was perhaps learned from. The night kept its counsel. In the morning, she would go to the park and see if the girl had built a better brace. She would take a longer branch, just in case. She would keep the slate where ordinary papers lived reachable. She would listen to the net that carried soup recipes and circuits, and the old human wish to be heard by someone who wasn't obliged to listen. If the Inheritors were still up there, if they were appraisers or prophets or simply efficient, Chloe wanted them to copy this. A woman moving a fragile thing higher on the shore, not to stop the tide, but to make space for the next pair of hands. The radio hissed in the dark, and then maybe didn't. The city's new muscles held the night together, the residuals, the pieces that remained when an equation balanced and a world kept breathing, glowed faintly on a kitchen table, a cylinder with a seam, a half sentence, a pencil, a page. She slept, and the future, which does not ask permission, kept coming.